You were the one who didn't cause problems, not the dramatic one, not the one who slammed doors or screamed at dinner, not the one who got drunk at 16 or failed every class or called home crying from a party at midnight. You weren't that person. You were the other one, the one who figured it out early, the one who understood somehow what the family needed from you, what would get you seen. You were the responsible one, the mature one, the one people talked about with that particular tone of relief. Thank God for you. At least you turned out okay. And for a long time, that felt like the truth about who you are. It felt like a compliment, and maybe it was. It felt like proof that you were doing something right, that you had figured out something the others hadn't. You organized things. You showed up. You were there when people needed you. You didn't ask for much. You handled your own stuff without making it everyone else's problem. The easy one. And here's what you never questioned: whether that was actually you, or whether it was what you learned to be. Being the good kid wasn't a personality. It was a survival strategy. Not survival in a dramatic sense, not abuse or violence or abandonment, though for some of you watching, those things were real and present, but survival in the quiet sense that every child has to figure out: how do I make sure I'm loved here? What version of me gets to stay? Every family is a system, and every system has rules, most of them never spoken. Rules about what emotions are allowed and which ones disappear. Rules about who gets to need things and who has to handle things. Rules about what makes someone valuable in this particular house. And every child, with extraordinary precision, reads those rules, not with their intellect, with their nervous system, with their capacity for connection and their terror of losing it. And some children, the ones who become the good kids, read the rules and understand something, that the full version of them is too much, or not enough, or inconvenient, and so they make a decision without knowing they're making it, to become smaller, cleaner, more manageable, more useful. They learn to suppress the anger, the need, the disappointment, the longing, the parts of themselves that make noise, and they get very good at it. So good that by the time they're adults, they've forgotten those parts ever existed. What they have instead is a reputation for being fine, for having it together, for being the one everyone can count on. And that reputation feels like identity. It feels like the truth of who they are. But it isn't. It's a mask. And Carl Jung gave that mask a name. He called it the persona. The persona, in Jung's framework, is the face we show the world, not the face we choose exactly, the face that forms in response to what the world needs from us. It's the role, the function, the costume the psyche builds so that we can belong, be accepted, survive in the particular environment we happen to be born into. Jung described it as a segment of the collective psyche, not something truly individual at all. Not you, a mask that simulates individuality while actually being shaped entirely by the needs of others. He wrote that the persona is like the actor's mask in ancient theater. It announces the role before the actor even speaks. What you see is the character, not the person inside it. For the good kid, the persona forms very early, and it forms under very specific conditions. When a child is rewarded for being calm, they learn that calm is the self. When a child is praised for not having needs, they learn that needlessness is a virtue. When a child is valued for holding things together, for being the stable one, the responsible one, the one who doesn't add to the weight, they learn that their value is structural, that they exist to support the system, not to be held by it, and the parts of them that don't fit that role don't disappear. Nothing in the psyche disappears. What happens is what Jung described as repression. The parts that aren't allowed become unconscious. They go somewhere else. They organize themselves in the dark, and they wait. This is the part that usually gets skipped in conversations about good kids and family systems. The speed at which it happens. The child doesn't sit down and decide to become someone. They don't choose the mask in any conscious sense. What happens is closer to calibration. Tiny adjustments made in fractions of seconds over years. a tone of voice read correctly, a silence that meant something absorbed, a look of relief on a parent's face when you didn't ask for something, noticed at 3 or 4 or 5 years old, stored without words, translated into behavior. By the time you were old enough to describe yourself, the persona was already structural. It wasn't something you wore. It was something you were made of, or so it seemed. Jung called that territory the shadow, the part of the personality that the conscious self has rejected. But here's the thing about good kids and their shadows that most people get wrong. The shadow isn't only dark. It isn't only the rage or the selfishness or the capacity to disappoint people. Those things are in there, yes. But so is everything else that wasn't permitted. The desire to be held, the hunger for someone else to handle something for once. The rage that has a name and a source and is completely legitimate. The creativity that was too strange or too loud. The ambition that felt like betrayal. The grief for what the family couldn't give. The joy that felt unsafe. Because what if it required things? What if it demanded space? What if it changed the terms of the deal? And here's what that actually looked like, for you specifically. Maybe it was the anger you felt, but couldn't show because anger in your house meant things would get worse, meant someone else would fall apart, meant you would become the problem you'd spent years making sure you weren't. So the anger didn't come out as anger. It came out as helpfulness, as preemptive smoothing of situations, as exhausting emotional work that you did, so automatically you don't even know you're doing it. Maybe it was the need, the ordinary human need to be taken care of, to have someone notice that you're struggling, to not always be the one who has to find the solution. The need got repressed so thoroughly that now, when someone offers to help you, your body doesn't know how to accept it. You deflect, you minimize, you say you're fine before they've finished asking. Maybe it was the refusal, the right to say no, the right to not be available, the right to disappoint someone and have that be acceptable. Somewhere very early you learned that your value was directly proportional to your usefulness, and anything that reduced your usefulness, any boundary, any limitation, any honest expression of what you didn't want, was a threat to something essential. So you became someone who always said yes, or someone who said yes and then resented it in silence. Jung called this the golden shadow. The parts of yourself that were exiled, not because they were dangerous, but because they weren't useful. Not because they would hurt anyone, but because the system didn't have room for them. Your need, your mess, your full emotional range, your ordinary, legitimate human complexity, all of it went underground. And now you're an adult, and the persona is so well built, so thoroughly maintained, that most days you don't notice it. You just experience it as yourself, as the way you are, as your nature. You genuinely believe you don't like needing things. You genuinely believe you're fine, and the shadow keeps waiting. The first place it appears is in what you can't receive. Someone tells you they love you, and something in you goes slightly sideways. Not because you don't feel anything, but because you immediately move toward what you can do for them next. How you can earn it. How you can maintain the terms of the exchange. Being loved without doing anything to deserve it in that moment is deeply uncomfortable. It feels vaguely like debt. There's a version of this that shows up at work too. You produce something excellent, and the moment the approval arrives, you're already looking for the next thing to prove. The good feedback doesn't settle, it evaporates immediately, because the persona that was built to earn love doesn't know how to rest inside the love it's already gotten. It only knows how to earn the next installment. So you keep producing, keep achieving, keep making yourself useful, and the exhaustion that comes from this isn't the exhaustion of someone who has worked too hard. It's the exhaustion of someone who has never, not once, felt like enough. The second place is in relationships where you slowly become the one who holds things together, not because you choose it consciously, because it's the role you know how to play. And you play it well, and people rely on you. And somewhere in year 3 or year 5, you realize you've become the stable one again, the one who doesn't require much, the one people come to with their weight. And you carry it, because you know how to carry it, because you've always known how to carry it, because carrying things was the original deal. And you're exhausted in a way that doesn't have a clear cause, because nothing specific is wrong. Nothing you could point to. You're just tired in the place behind your eyes, in the part that has been performing something for a very long time. The third place is anger. The good kid's anger is very specific. It doesn't come out directly. It doesn't announce itself. It comes out sideways, as perfectionism that punishes you when you fall short, as a sharpness in your tone when someone lets you down that feels disproportionate to you even as you feel it, as a particular kind of resentment for people who seem to move through the world taking up space without apology, people who ask for things, who say no without explanation, who need things openly and aren't ashamed of it. You watch them with something that is not quite admiration and not quite contempt. It's closer to longing, if you let yourself feel it long enough. Because what you resent in them is the permission you never gave yourself. The anger belongs to the child who needed things and learned not to say so. The child who was disappointed and learned to be grateful instead. The child who was afraid and learned to be strong. The child who needed someone to carry something and carried it themselves, because that was the only available option. That child never got to be angry. That child never got to take up space. That child never got to say, "This isn't enough, I need more, I deserve to be held." So the anger stayed, and it didn't age. That's the thing about what's in the shadow. It doesn't develop. It doesn't mature alongside the conscious personality. The anger that belongs to the 8-year-old who never got to have it is still 8 years old's anger. It still has 8 years old's intensity and 8 years old's certainty that the world will end if it's expressed. So when it surfaces in the 40-year-old, in the relationship, in the argument, in the moment of feeling unrecognized, it feels enormous and disproportionate. And it is, in a sense, because it's not just this moment's anger, it's decades of it. That's why the good kid's anger is so confusing. It doesn't feel earned by the current situation. You look at what triggered you and think, "This isn't that big a deal. Something is wrong with me," and you push it back down. But the anger is not the problem. The anger is information. It's the oldest available evidence that there was always more of you than the system made room for. And somewhere in adulthood, in the relationship that finally asked too much, in the moment someone took your steadiness for granted one more time, in the year you turned however old you are now and realized you have never once asked anyone to take care of you, the anger tries to surface, and you push it back down. Because good kids don't do that. Because you work too hard building the version of yourself that doesn't need things. Because if you stop holding it together, who will? Here is what Jung understood about the persona that most people never confront. A man who lives entirely inside his persona transfers all of his disturbance outward, onto the people closest to him, onto his body, into the cracks in his life where the real self keeps trying to find a way through. Identification with a social role is not stability. It is a source of neurosis. Not because the role is bad, but because no human being can fully inhabit a role without destroying themselves from the inside. And the good kid has been inhabiting the role so long they can't find the exit. The grief that lives underneath this, and it is grief, is among the most difficult kinds to process, because it has no object. No one died. Nothing catastrophic happened. You had, in many cases, good parents who loved you and did their best. You had a childhood that wasn't terrible by any measure most people use. But you lost something. You lost the version of yourself that was allowed to be complicated. The version that could be angry and sad and needy and difficult and still get to stay. The version that didn't have to earn its place. The version that existed before the deal was made. You don't know when it happened. You can't point to the day. You just know that at some point the mask grew onto your face, and now you're not sure where it ends and you begin. The way out of the persona is not to destroy it. Jung was clear about this. The persona isn't the enemy. It served a real function. It got you through a real situation. The child who built it was not wrong. The child was brilliant, in fact, reading the room at an age when survival depended on reading it correctly, adapting with extraordinary skill to an environment that had specific requirements. That child did what it had to do. The problem isn't that the persona exists. The problem is that you've forgotten it's a mask. The beginning of what Jung called individuation The process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you were shaped to be begins with exactly this: seeing the persona for what it is, not dismantling it overnight, not performing some theatrical transformation, just recognizing with clear eyes that what you've called your personality contains significant portions of what was required of you rather than what emerged from you. That distinction matters. Start by noticing where the discomfort lives. The good kid's discomfort is very specific. It shows up when someone depends on you in a way that feels limitless, when someone asks you to need something and you can't do it, when a relationship feels like it's asking you to have a full range of emotions and something in you wants to simplify, flatten, become functional again. When you receive something, genuine care, genuine recognition, genuine tenderness, and your first impulse is to minimize it or deflect it or immediately reciprocate so the balance is restored. Notice that discomfort. Don't analyze it yet. Just notice it. And then notice something harder. The moments when you perform the good kid, even when no one is watching, when you're alone and you're still managing your own needs as if they're an inconvenience, when you push through exhaustion because rest feels like a failure, when you have a feeling that is large and legitimate and you compress it into something smaller and more manageable before it even fully forms, as if the first audience for the persona is yourself. That's important, because the good kid's persona doesn't just operate in relationship to others, it operates inside. The critical internal voice, the one that says you should be doing more, that you're not enough, that your needs are a burden. That voice is not yours. It was installed by the system. It got internalized so early and so thoroughly that it sounds exactly like your own thoughts. It sounds like self-awareness. It sounds like high standards. It sounds like just being honest with yourself. It's not. It's the voice of the original deal, still running, still making sure you stay in line. The work here is not to silence that voice by force. It's to learn to recognize it when it speaks, to develop just enough separation between yourself and the persona, to say, that's the mask talking, not me, and then ask a different question than the one you've been asking. The question you've been asking is, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just receive this? Why do I keep ending up in the same dynamic? Why am I so tired? The question that opens something is, what part of me is this protecting? Because behind every layer of the persona, behind every version of I'm fine, and I don't need much, and I'm just not someone who asks for things, there is something that needed protection at some point. Something that was real and young and specific. Not a weakness, not a deficiency, just a part of you that learned that the cost of visibility was too high. That part didn't die. It doesn't need to be excavated in some dramatic session. It just needs you to stop calling your persona your personality. It needs you to look at the role you've been playing and say, I know this is a role. Not with shame, not with anger at whoever constructed it, just with clarity. Because that clarity, that one degree of separation between you and the mask, is where the whole thing begins to shift. Not in one conversation, not in one realization, in the accumulation of small moments where you catch yourself performing and choose, just for a second, to do something else. Where you let someone help you without immediately helping them back. Where you say what you actually want instead of what would be convenient for everyone else. Where you let the anger have a name instead of sending it underground. Where you grieve the childhood you actually had instead of defending the childhood you wish you'd had. The good kid grew up believing that love was conditional on performance, that value was earned rather than inherent, that the price of belonging was the suppression of everything inconvenient. That was never true. It was just the deal that got made when you were too young to negotiate differently. You can renegotiate now, not with your family, with yourself. The mask isn't you. It kept you safe. It did its job. You got here. But the version of you that exists on the other side of it, messy, complicated, needing things, taking up space, that one was always there. You didn't lose it. You just learned to be very quiet about it. There is a particular kind of courage that the good kid has to develop. Not the courage to be strong. You already know how to do that. The courage to stop. But here's what no one tells you about the good kid's shadow. It doesn't just hold your wounds, it holds your power. And in the next video, we're going to look at exactly what was put there and what it means to claim it back. What role did you play in your family? And when did you first realize it was a role? Be honest in your answer and stay with us to learn more about the hidden parts of your personality. You don't need to hide here. You can finally be yourself.